Hello, welcome back to the Rams Review podcast. And we've got slightly less positive results, but I think the performances were still there. So should still be a good episode as I am joined by Nigel Owen once more
Evening all.
and Chris Holt.
Good evening, Jack. Good evening, Nigel. So it's been a couple of weeks busy reffing here, there, and everywhere. So great to be back.
Excellent. Yeah, reffing is one of the things I'm sure we'll come on to after last night and the discourse online. But yeah, obviously we spoke last week, Nigel. 4 wins on the trot about keeping that momentum up. Arguably stalled on Saturday with the result, but I think as we were just saying before we came on air, still positives to take. What were your kind of initial thoughts on Saturday?
I think that's the thing is, we said last week 4 wins in a row is difficult whether you're top or bottom of this division. So, to achieve it was huge. To keep it going was always going to be difficult, irrespective of who you're coming up against. But I think, the positives are that the performances continue to be turned in, and as many managers have said down the time, if you keep doing the right things, keep doing your processes well, keep putting in the performances, the results will follow. And I think that's that plus now being out of the bottom three for a few games now, I think gives us the optimism with a handful of games to go that we can remain out of that bottom three.
Indeed, and Chris, you say it's been a few weeks. How have you felt watching Derby recently? What have your kind of key takeaways been?
Um, I think the main takeaway from everything is that I now don't sit there with that probability that we had 5 or 6 weeks ago that we were going to lose and or concede an early goal. There just seems to be a real good, honest structure about the team. It's no frills. I think the team is set up to the best of its capabilities. There's as many square pegs in square holes, which is most important. And look, if we'd have turned around and said we'll get 1 point off playing Swansea and Burnley within 3 days, I think any realist would have took it, because as we'll come to the Burnley game, if the fixtures were reversed and we got a draw at Swansea with a last minute goal and then lost to Burnley 1-0, then people would not see it would probably see it differently, because they always looked at Burnley as a free hit. So yeah, I just think there's a real nice structure about the team.
Square pegs in square holes. That is something that I don't think we've been able to say for a while, Chris. So that is nice. But yeah, I mean, my feeling from Saturday, as I was following the game, doing content from the game in between toothache, unfortunately, so there's no peace on Saturday. But my feeling from that, aside from ow, my tooth, was Derby were really unlucky. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like Swansea scoring the first shot on target. Derby unfortunate, really, to not take anything from that.
Yeah, I think we were. I don't want to say toothless because it wasn't quite that, and that's not to put any further pain on you, Jack. But it's interesting because I've been quite vocal, I think, through the season that I don't see Jerry Yates as a natural finisher and goal scorer, but it did seem that we were lacking something up front without him there on Saturday. And look, I think it was one of those games that if either side had won it, I think the opposition would have felt a little bit hard done by. Not getting anything from it, I think felt quite harsh, really, and probably one of those that from early on looked like it had 0-0 written all over it. Unlike last night's, which, given how much they attacked us in the first 15 minutes last night, there was no way I could see us hanging on for a 0-0, and I thought we were going to have to score. Shows probably what I know about it. But yeah, I think Jerry Yates coming back in, will probably come on to this, but I think we miss Yates in the side, not for his goal scoring, but what he brings in bringing other people into the game around him. And that was just a little bit lacking on Saturday, I think.
Chris?
Yeah, I think the thing I take from Saturday's game is that you can see why we have some of the players in our team and in this league, because if there was just an extra bit of final product on their play, they'd be top 10 in the Premier League. And I'm talking the likes of Kane Wilson, who we'll come on to. And a similar thing of his performance against Burnley, which we'll come on to. It just shows you that concentration is absolute paramount when you are playing the style of play that we are, because ultimately our bodies are getting more tired. And one thing it never shows on stats is how many kilometres each team has ran. Now, obviously, Jack, you may have them stats, and I'd love to know what kind of distances the Derby players are running on average on these games against the likes of Swansea and Burnley, because ultimately, as we all know, the further that you run and start to gasp for air and lose oxygen, naturally your concentration does tend to waver. And I just wondered whether at that, if it's such a crucial time of the game, late 70th minute, and that's when a lot of substitutions are normally made, and it just shows you that we can go onto the goal with Swansea, and there'll be lots of different fingers pointed at who's responsible, but ultimately it's concentration, isn't it?
It is, and it's yet another game where Derby have been involved, and it's been decided by just the one goal and that one moment. Really, there feels like there's been a remarkable amount of them this season. On those stats, I can tell you that Opta do track them. Unfortunately, even with all these kind of databases that are now free and the kind of democratization of stats, I don't know where to find them as of yet on a free site. If anybody does, let us know. If it's something you need to pay for, if it's extortionate, then does someone want to sponsor us? If it's reasonable, I'll buy it because I love a stat. But yeah, I think it's something you can see the sheer numbers of recoveries and things like that as well that Derby are making in a game. Just that work rate is immense, and yeah, the eye test is still really the best way to track that. But I think if we look at the goal, there's a few different people that fingers could be pointed at. I think Kane Wilson, as you mentioned, was probably the primary one when it first happened, which is interesting. I mean, look, Kane Wilson, great at what he does going forward. There's always going to be that little bit of question at the back, but I think there's a number of things that happened there. So yeah, I guess where do you guys point the finger, Nigel?
Wilson's the obvious one, I think. When you look at it, it's his man at the far post. But as always with these things, if you can cut things off at source before you get there, I think it was perhaps telling that they got Mendes-Lang warmed up, ready to come on. Perhaps would that have been for Jackson at 0-0? I know it changed slightly when the goal went in, but at 0-0, was it Jackson? Were his legs getting more tired, and would a fresh Mendes-Lang have got a little bit close to the first ball in? That's one you can look at. They're then still not quite sure what Langas was doing with it as well. I thought he could have got his head to it. Perhaps he was worried about where the header might end up, but maybe Kane Wilson needs to tell him more, as he can see everything from round there as the fullback. But just a little bit of after you, no, after you, oh, somebody else has nipped in. So, I think it doesn't seem like a team that points fingers. I think they will have been honest, and I think Kane Wilson will have been honest and held his hand up and said that he should have done better. But I think, it definitely feels like a team that wins as a team and loses as a team. And the fact that they were able to bounce back from such a disappointment, with a largely similar side playing yesterday, is testament to how quickly they do turn their mentality around and get back onto the road of picking up points.
Chris?
I agree with Nigel's sentiments. I think what I will say is that we don't know what percentage Langas can give, because he definitely didn't attack the ball, and people are saying he actually ducked. I'm not sure whether he was probably in a fit state to even attempt to go for the ball. Also, I noticed that Clark wasn't sort of the central figure and sort of marshalling the defence. I think Ed picked up on Radio Derby, and that shows sometimes when you jig something so intricate but so important. I think there was probably a misunderstanding between the three of them of whose responsibility it was to clear it. But Langas, as we'll come to at Burnley, didn't quite look fit enough to probably establish a position or strength to clear that ball.
Yeah, and I guess that is the challenge of Callum Elder's injury as well, disrupting the usual back line that has prompted so many good performances and results. Craig Forsyth at wing back on Saturday, and then again last night. I mean, one stat to bring you before we kind of move on to Burnley. I noticed, I might have mentioned this last week, or I honestly can't remember. Callum Elder, most touches in the attacking third for Derby in the last 3 games that he played in before the Preston game in which he got injured. So he's very involved in that final third play. And I think I've definitely noticed a difference in South Wales. And then to an extent last night, but maybe less so with Forsyth there. I think he, we'll come on to it, did a really good job against Marcus Edwards, but it definitely alters the dynamics. So yeah, that's certainly an interesting one, as well as the absence of Yates. And I guess that's what Derby are kind of having to roll with the punches and deal with, isn't it? But yeah, ultimately, unfortunate, bit of miscommunication, costly. And I think the same could be said last night. So nearly defensively on many occasions, and then costing them perhaps what should have been a late winner. So I think the fact that we're coming away from playing the team who were top of the league going into the evening, arguably disappointed with a point based on performance, is testament to the side. But Chris, what were your thoughts on last night?
I thought that the actual Burnley style of play, excuse me, suits Derby's style of pressing, because for all the percentages they had of the ball, which was 70%, and I never thought, honestly, we're under any real pressure. Burnley play a very similar style of football to I remember when Liam Senior was at the helm, and they do play some lovely, intricate, accurate football. But the way that Derby press and the way that they marked each individual zone was nothing short of sensational and very, very astute coaching, because the back three never really got dragged out of position. And that's always a good thing when you've got not a lot of pace between the three in particular that we're going to talk about. And because of that, because of the midfielder doing such a lot of work to press early in their zones, it allows the back three to stay structured and not be dragged out. Because Burnley were clearly trying to drag out Clark and Phillips. Like Fleming was coming quite deep, and it just wasn't working. They just didn't need Clark or Phillips to go with him because you had Thompson ratting around, you had Armstrong who was there. It's just a very clever structure, and it works really well.
It does. I mean, they described it on the Sky Sports coverage last night as almost like another back four once Armstrong and Thompson dropped in, and it is. It's that solidity really that's needed against those sides. I mean, a very interesting battle that I think would have had many Derby fans slightly nervous before the game, Nigel, was that of Craig Forsyth against Marcus Edwards, who is on loan from Sporting in Portugal, seen by many as a Premier League quality player, really, who shouldn't have dropped down to the Championship for the second half of the season. But I don't know about you, I felt he handled him quite well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you were saying about, Forsyth not adding the same sort of stats going forward as Elder. I think we all know that Forsyth is a steady defender, and we have seen him at times get forward and at times, contribute to the goals tally this season. But I think perhaps now, given the setup that we've got, when he is playing that left wing back position, he probably now errs more on the defensive side, because we do seem to be creating a bit more going forward. We're not relying on the creation to come from necessarily the wing backs as such. And I think he's still far better suited to that left centre half in the back three. I think he's less exposed to pace. But last night, yeah, he handled them well there. And first 15, 20 minutes, there are a couple of runs that caused us a few problems. But once we snuffed them out, and once we actually started to play ourselves and got a foothold in the game, I think, again, as the Sky commentator said, if you come to the game not knowing which side was the top of the table and which was one spot above relegation, and you had to guess, it would have been very difficult to pick which side was which.
Indeed. In terms of that, Chris, and what you talked about with the structure, how do you think that's going to be shifted without somebody like Callum Elder at the back? Have you noticed the difference in that, or is that just full credit to John Eustace for managing to keep that so structured, so disciplined?
I think it comes from experience within the team as well. That there's far more experience in the team than people realise, and I think that he likes to play 11 versus 11 in his training sessions at Moor Farm. So I think that he adapts to situations if the likes of his first choice players aren't available. Now, I think one thing that we miss with Elder, and Nigel alluded to it, is his accuracy of passing. He's a very good passer of the ball. He's very creative, and he's it goes under the radar somewhat how good his link-up play is, and I think that's one thing that we missed. And I think there were certain elements of the game or certain opportunities last night when Fozzie had the chance to play through Yates. One was delicious, and we nearly got through, but I think other elements and situations, i.e., dead ball plays, Elder has missed terribly, and I think a fit Callum Elder last night would have probably opened up Burnley a few more chances.
Yeah, see, again, this just seems like something that we come back to with Derby all season with these injuries. But the fact that we're now having that conversation over having a point and arguably potentially should have had three rather than having dropped a point again is the kind of marked difference. But I mean, in terms of that game last night, Nigel, you alluded to it. First 25 minutes, Burnley on top. Although I did feel like they struggled to threaten in Derby's box, really. They're playing around the edge, weren't they? Apart from that one great save that Zetterstrom had to make from Fleming. I think there's a little bit of luck with that miscommunication between Zetterstrom and Phillips on the edge of the box. But from there, Derby came into it and they ended that first half firmly the better side, I think it's fair to say, Nigel.
Yeah, I think definitely the case. And look, when you're playing a team who has conceded as few goals as they are, who has just gone to the top of the table for the first time in sort of 6 months, which is, as they always say, peak at the right time. Something that Leeds don't seem to be able to do too well, as we've seen in previous seasons. It, you're never going to have the run of the game for 90 minutes, particularly when you play the way that Derby have found success in playing, which is, with only 25, 30, 35% of the ball. I think we all knew that Burnley are going to put us under some pressure. But again, as you say, I think, Zetterstrom in the last few games has only had one, possibly two saves a game to make. And I think that's a mark of a great keeper, that not having a lot to do, but when called upon, he's done what he's been required to do. And that yesterday was it was worth the point, because if that goes in the way they were playing, then you felt, that and the fact they don't concede, it would have been difficult to come back into that game. But I think, all over the park there are players who've improved under John Eustace. And one thing that I've been glad to see from Zetterstrom, who I think, in terms of saves, has been excellent since he's come in. One thing he did get criticism for was his kicking. And under the new goalkeeping coach, his distribution already seems far, far, far better. There's the odd one that still fails to keep on the island, but he seems to be picking out our players better, seems to be keeping the ball in play better, doesn't seem to rush out and just aimlessly boot it upfield as much. So yeah, credit to the goalkeeping coach that's come in, that has improved that side of his game, which, for me was the one weakness that he had since he came in.
Yeah, as you say, full credit to Paul Clements, not to be confused with the former Rams boss, who was Carlo Ancelotti's assistant at various places. This is the former Norwich goalkeeping coach, who I know is highly thought of at the club, rightly so, based on his impact so far in a short space of time as well. I think it's definitely been a marked improvement. Someone who had such an improvement, Chris, under Eustace, has maybe gone a little bit quieter over those last couple of games was Marcus Harness, and I think I noticed that particularly towards the end of that first half in that good spell. Some of those deliveries were just a bit inconsistent from the corners, and what do you put that down to?
I think that Marcus plays well and this sounds really derogatory, and I don't mean it in the way, against lesser opposition. If you look at where his goals have been scored and who's been potentially marking him, he stood out. But last night, he played against a team that conceded 12 goals all season, and it and they not. One thing that interests me about Burnley, not even a particularly big team, is in height. They've got the tall French lad, but in general, they were. We had a bigger, I'm sure, back line than they did in height and stature, which impressed me actually how tight they are and how little they concede. And I just don't think they allowed Harness to play. Um, I also find sometimes if Harness has got too much time on the ball, he overthinks. I think Harness is very good on that split second flick, that split second decision, that split turn and shoot. Whereas last night, I think Burnley almost stood off him somewhat and said, "Okay, Marcus, turn, and then let's see what you can do." Because they know he's got that burst of 5 yards. And if you give someone that burst, but knowing that you've dropped back to take the 6th yard and to take the ball off them, and that's the way Burnley played. I just thought it wasn't a great game and for him. And, I think he was taken off at the right time. And, you know, we'll go on to the chances that we had and potentially we should have scored. But ultimately, Marcus has chipped in with some very crucial goals, and we can't take anything away from him with that. But I just thought that the quality of opposition last night was just too much for his game style.
Yeah, that's interesting because I mean, just looking at all my notes from last night, one of the kind of key moments for me with him was knocking that ball down to Yates and Trafford making that save towards the end of the first half, and that
Mm,
was one of those split second kind of gut instinct decisions, and you
yeah,
still saw him really involved then. So I think, yeah, absolutely. You know, as I say, flurry of corners towards the end of the half, deliveries inconsistent. Derby again, so unfortunate. Head in hands moment, really. You know, Clark and Adams keep the set piece alive after it's delivered to the back post. No one is there as they move it back across goal to turn it in, and it's just that positioning. And I feel like it was one of those games, even as Derby had Burnley on the ropes coming towards half time, where that's just the fine margins of football at this level, right, Nigel?
Yeah, no, I think Burnley will look at it that way, and even on Saturday, there were, like I say, there's fine margins. Kane Wilson switches off for a minute, we lose the point there. And I think again, probably repeating myself. Look, 4 wins in four was great. If you look back at it over 6 games, 13 points from 6 games is a fantastic return. But yeah, look, and again, if you look at it over a wider period of time, if you're creating those opportunities, if the balls are getting in the box and goals are going to come, right? You have to worry when chances are not being created, when the balls are not getting in the box, that kind of thing. And it's interesting, Chris, you mentioned there about the height of our back line. I think again, we're still causing problems for what is the best defense in the league by a margin by just launching the ball into the box, long throws, crosses, get the ball in there, get the ball in the mixer, to use the old-fashioned phrase for it, and see what happened. And we caused panic amongst them a few times last night. And I'm yet to see a defence really that copes with us when we get the ball in the box from set pieces and it drops and somebody has a lash at it, or it drops and we can nick it in from there. So again, it just gives me optimism that we are going to create enough chances to have fate in our own hands in the remaining 5 games of this season.
Indeed. And I think that was a golden one right on the stroke of half time. Derby set to counter. A little bit of controversy. I'll come to you, Chris, because of the look you gave me when I first brought this up, quite frankly. Um, Bobby Madley blows the whistle for half time. The additional minute has been played, but Derby look in a strong position, and there were a fair few boos around Pride Park. What were your thoughts on that?
it's a tough one for a referee because they have to decide at what part of the pitch is classed as an attacking position. Um, yeah, I think he had to blow. To be honest, I think he had to blow the whistle. I think if it was probably more obvious as in a two against one, one against one, then perhaps not. But I don't think there was enough um, probability or possibility of Derby creating something. But what I will say, and going back to what Nigel said, is yeah, we did really cause them panic in that 7 or 8 minutes. It was just relentless pressure coming ultimately from Wilson coming into the game quickly, and it just goes back to the old analogy. Yeah, if we just had a striker, but you've got to also give credit to their keeper Trafford, who, you know, just shows you how highly he's rated because, one split bit of concentration and he pulls off some really important blocks. But actually, people were saying that he saved Yates' shot. But if I'm right in saying, did someone come back from midfield and literally have a late lunge to clear the ball from behind him when he was about to strike it? It looked like a phenomenal save, but I think actually it was a defensive clearance.
Yeah, from the replay, it looked to me like it was kind of blocked cleared, and it might have hit Trafford's right hand, which was definitely out
Mm.
as it went behind. Whether it hit his hands as it went behind or not, I'm not 100% sure. But there was definitely a defensive intervention. But yeah, I think we saw the quality of Burnley's defence shine through. There is no shame in not scoring against what is, I would imagine, the best defence in Championship history at this point of the season, conceding only 12 goals. More teams have come away from the game against Burnley having not scored than have. Um, it's ridiculous. They've already got the record for most clean sheets of the Championship season, and there's what, 5 games to go. Um, but but yeah, I think Kane Wilson did impress me with that kind of ability in tight spaces in that period. I will say that you definitely saw his ability there, and again, it just makes you think if this squad can stay up and be kept together, then you give him that bit more license. What you got to fit Ryan Nyambe or someone like that. Who knows? Who knows where it goes? But I think, yeah, that was definitely a big factor. Nigel, what were your thoughts on kind of Bobby Madley blowing the whistle when he did?
I mean, the trouble is there are people's interpretations of what's the law, right? The law says actually when time's up, whether the ball's heading into the net or cross or whatever. There's a general acceptance that normally it's done in a neutral part of the pitch, and I think Bobby Madley probably felt that by then the ball had returned to a fairly neutral part of the pitch. As you say, I think he indicated a minimum of 1 minute. I think we're at 104 or 106 or something like that. So he was well within his rights to blow up. I thought overall, if we're picking on that to pick up the referee, I thought overall last night he didn't get involved too much. He went away fairly anonymously, and that's as an official myself, that's what you don't want people to be talking about you at the end of the game, and I don't think anybody was talking about any of his major decisions affecting the result of the game really yesterday.
No, absolutely. As I said, the only reason I bring it up is because I think people seem to have opinions at half time from the content. I'll get thoughts of people who officiate, and hopefully we've put that to bed. I think yeah, he's entirely within his rights, and there we
I
go.
think
But yeah,
I think it's one of those. It's a little bit sort of the general average fan is misinformed about the law in that one. The same as people who haven't caught up with the offside law and the fact that you can now be offside in your own half, that kind of thing. Yeah.
yes, 100%. Second half, I feel like Derby still did quite well to kind of limit Burnley. Didn't feel like anywhere near as much happened in terms of chances until we got to stoppage time. Really, when as I wrote last night, we're a simple shout of mine or leave it or something along those lines being heard from 3 points really. But yeah, what were your thoughts on the second half from that late chance, Chris?
I almost thought that Burnley ran out of ideas and they were almost contemplating taking the draw and accepting that let's come out of Derby with a point because teams around them as they're showing on exactly the great amount of form with the likes of Sheffield United now losing two on the spin. Yeah, the chance was the most blatant, obvious, wasn't it? It's a bizarre situation that Clark must have known that Yates was there. My only thought is that Clark was 100% adamantly confident that he was going to get over the ball and score the goal, and he's either jumped too early or jumped too late. And like I said, was it a case of if a call came in, was it too late, or didn't he call at all? It's a strange one, and only them two will ever know what the situation was. Because let's be honest, Trafford was done, and I think, and I'll pass the baton on to Nigel. I'm pretty confident that if that would have gone in, the Derby would have excelled in the last 2 or 3 minutes, and Burnley would not have scored.
Absolutely agree with that, Chris. I think that was the game there in that moment. I just wonder if given it was a cross from inside the area, this wasn't one that was going to be whipped in from 30, 40 yards out, that whether Clark had already started to make his run and it did get a deflection, a sort of slight loop off the defender's legs, and whether that was just sort of what put him off slightly from his run and almost being too committed to it. He almost couldn't get out of the way. And that was it. Whether he could have ducked, I don't know. But wait, Yates must have been, head in hands doesn't do it enough justice, does it? As to how frustrated he must have been at what was a slam dunk, a penalty kick, whatever you want to call it, of a chance to put home and pick up what would have been a valuable extra 2 points, really, and really moved us up the table a bit closer to safety and another goal in terms of the goal difference, which I think our goal difference is in a solid place, but everything that can help that, just in case that comes into play at the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna have a look because I was just thinking I dread to think what the XG would have been on that chance had it had fallen to Yates. But I am just gonna have a look now at what the XG was for Matt Clark's header. Bear with me as I can tell you. Obviously, people listening to this will know all the results. But good news as we are recording, Plymouth are 3-0 down. So it appears that Derby will remain 5 points ahead of them. We will go into kind of the final five for the bottom six, bottom eight in a moment. But yeah, it was a golden chance, and I mean even that miss from Matt Clark, that itself was a zero point 0.8 xG chance. So if that header was 0.8, then Jerry Yates's would have been 0.95 plus, I reckon. Huge
I think
opportunity.
point eight is harsh on that because I think if he could have got high enough to head it in, he would have done it. Unfortunately, it was just a little bit too high. But
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I guess there's always the interpretation things. Was it that the overall chance was point 0.8? Then if he left it to Yates, it would have been point 0.8, but he got in the way himself, and that was what hindered it. I never quite fully understand exactly where they get the XG bit from on that. But look, needless to say, that was probably the best chance of the game, and that was 2 points that went begging with it.
It's good
100%.
that Jack, that Derby have actually got two people on the goal line in the 91st minute wanting to put in a ball from, of all people, Caden Jackson, who, let's be honest, hasn't been the shining light recently, and that's probably the best bit of play he's done for Derby since the new year. So, to actually create that chance against the top of the league and the best defence in the league, whether it goes in or not is another story. But I was really impressed that Clark had the energy on the 91st minute to be doing that. And you saw at the end of the game where Phillips is telling him you can see Clark is beating himself up terribly with it. And Phillips is giving him a bit of a rollicking, saying, just snap out of it, Matt. We've got a point. Let's move on. But yeah. And I think that shows you the commitment that Clark has for the club at the moment. He's on a short-term deal, but you wouldn't think that, would you? Seeing the way he's played, he's been incredible.
Yeah, it's a remarkable spirit from this team as they get another huge point. The last part of the episode, really, we're gonna look ahead. We're gonna look ahead to Saturday, as I say. Derby heading down south to face Portsmouth in what could still be classed as a 6 pointer, really, particularly if Portsmouth lose tonight. And what is becoming an incredibly tense running for everyone involved. So, first of all, what are your thoughts, Chris, looking ahead to Saturday afternoon?
Portsmouth's last 5 or 6 games have all been within one goal, win or lose. Um, their last game, I believe, there was away at Millwall and they lost 2-1. Prior to that, they won 1-0 at Blackburn, and then you go back, they lost 2-1 at Preston, lost 2-1 at home to Plymouth of all people, and then got beat 1-0 by Luton, but somehow managed to get a 1-0 win against Leeds. So read into that what you will. It's clearly going to be a very tight game. Um, and they're not scoring freely either. So although they're scoring more than Derby in general, they don't come across as a team that's whipping people. It's going to be incredible atmosphere at Fratton Park. They are selling out every game. We know that, and they still really need 2 or 3 results for them to be certain. You know, if the result goes against them tonight against Coventry, then they're still within our grasp of catching them. Um, I just think it'll be really cagey, and I don't think Derby have got anything to fear. If anything, I think the way Derby have been playing actually puts John Messina on the back foot in how he sets up Portsmouth. And how many times did we used to say about our previous managers setting up for us to go against teams coming to us, and we used to be absolutely fuming about it. When now I honestly believe that Portsmouth will be looking at Derby's results against Burnley and Swansea and thinking, how do we crack them? Because they look absolutely solid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Nigel, any
there was
thoughts?
some. Yeah, there were some results last night, obviously, that weren't the expected ones, but I think Derby's would have been the one that most teams would have been looking at, saying that was the biggest surprise. Derby getting a point off Burnley, given the run that they've been on. Yeah, I had a look at the table as we all do, and you always try and analyze it at this point in time. And I think 5 games to go is where you can start to look at the individual fixtures and see where it's going to come. I think, although Preston, Swansea, and QPR probably mathematically points wise, you look at it and say they're still catchable. The fact that, I won't take it as gospel, but at this point in time, QPR are 2 up on Oxford and Swansea are 3 up on Plymouth. I think you can assume that they've got those 3 points in the bag tonight. That takes Swansea to 51 points, QPR to 49. I think those three between them play each other twice amongst that. So I think, those three are probably, far enough gone. Pompey are probably the top of the catchable, if that's the way you want to put it now. With the bottom 8, Plymouth losing tonight, 5 points off Derby, 6 essentially given the goal difference. A 26 difference in the goal difference means they've got to make up 6 games. They've got Sheffield United to play, they've got Leeds to play, they've got Borough and Coventry who are both going for the playoffs to play. You just can't see how they're going to get 6 points from that, let alone 6 plus hopefully what Derby are going to get on top of that from there. There isn't another club, interestingly, that has it as much in their own hands as Derby. We have in our last 5 games Portsmouth, Luton, Hull, Stoke. 4 other teams very much in the mix with 5 games to play. And that last day of the season, I don't think you could have predicted the teams that are going to be in the mix. But if Sky could ever pick the matchups on that last day of the season, wow. Swansea, Oxford, Hull, Portsmouth, Derby, Stoke, any one of those three, two, all of them could be relegation 6 pointers come the end of the day. And it could be one of those that they're flicking between channels to see who's moving around towards the bottom 3 on that last day for what will probably be the final space, I think, when we get to that point. Yeah, I'd just like to. What I'd love to know is when we get to that final day, that actually Derby and Stoke both need a point, and we pay out the most boring 0-0 you've ever seen for 90 minutes, knocking the ball across the back 4, each side having 50% possession and no shots on target. That would suit me.
Yeah, I need to figure out what I'm going to do that day in terms of whether I'm better, and we won't know until we get to the final match day. Am I better to be there, or am I better to have all these screens with all the different games? Because genuinely, it could be that tight. I might need to be across everything during the game with the way it's going at the moment. It would look like that. But yeah, I mean, doing a bit of basic maths that I was doing last night. If Coventry were to beat Portsmouth tonight, then a win for Derby on Saturday would take them above Pompey. Um, that's you talk about them being catchable. They definitely are. But as you say, I think that kind of bottom third is the cliched mini league now. Um, so yeah, I mean Portsmouth, interesting side. Josh Murphy's going to be difficult to deal with. Third or second behind the two who are joint first on most assists. He's seventh for combined goals and assists in a championship. Portsmouth, highest scorers than Derby over the course of the season, but of course Derby's figure is going to be weighted lower because of how they played under the previous manager. Really, I don't think this is going to be another 4-0 for either side, as you say. I think it's going to be tight, going to be cagey. What we would do for Joe Ward to roll it back a year, or have someone do what he did at Fratton Park just over a year ago in that game. But yeah, I think that's going to be massive. But as you say, so many of these for Derby, so many 6-pointers. I remember saying, what, a month or two ago, if Derby could be, even if there are a few points adrift going into the final five, with all the 6-pointers, they've still got a chance. As it stands, they're going into it with it in their own hands just about, which is such a great position to be in. I mean, looking at Saturday more widely, as you say, Plymouth, how Sheffield United, Cardiff Stoke is going to be huge at the Cardiff City Stadium. What do you think is maybe the best result from a Derby perspective there, guys?
I'll take that first. I want draws all over the place. Keep everyone involved. Keep everyone looking over their shoulders. I think if any team gets 3 points this weekend, it gives them more confidence going into the final four, doesn't it? And I think that's the way you look at it. I think if we can sneak a win and see draws around us, we're gaining 2 points on everybody. There is obviously Nigel will come back with a great stat, probably looking at, is there actually a better percentage for Derby for opposition to perhaps bury the like, perhaps seeing Cardiff lose might be the better obvious one. You see, I'm looking at Luton's fixtures now as we speak, and they've got probably their most winnable game this Saturday at Blackburn, but then they've got us at Pride Park, and then they play fifth, sixth, and seventh currently battling for the playoffs. Bristol, Coventry, and West Brom. And I would not like that running going into trying to save my life in the Championship, knowing you're playing three teams who are fighting to get into the richest and most expensive final in the world.
Yeah, I think there's lots of that when you look through it. Say, do you want to be playing the teams that are around you? Do you want to be playing what is still actually a small number of teams for this stage of the season that don't have anything to play for? That probably only Norwich, Blackburn, and Sheffield Wednesday, who are the three sides that aren't in the mix for the playoffs. Perhaps going to add, you can perhaps add Swansea to that after tonight's game if they do carry on and come out with the 3 points from that. But yeah, I think in all these sorts of games when teams are playing each other, the worst result for us is having the team below us win. So, that Cardiff Stoke game, if Cardiff were to win, that's probably the one result we don't want. A draw works for us, keeps both in touch. If Stoke win it, then it's on us, which it always is. If we win our game, then it doesn't matter if Stoke win. If both of us then pull 3 points further away from Cardiff, happy days. That's the position we've got ourselves to by getting out of the bottom three. And as I think I mentioned tonight and probably before, that goal difference is our extra point as well. That's the crucial bit here. Only Hull in that mix have got a better goal difference than us. And so even if Cardiff were to catch us on points, I can't see them closing a 10 goal difference over the next 5 games. If that is the case, then we'll have performed so badly that points won't be coming into it. And the same with Luton, really. So, I still think 50 points is probably the target we've got to go for. If we were to beat Pompey, I think that keeps it in there. If they were to get a draw off us on Saturday, then I think, given that they've got a couple of those teams I've mentioned, the Norwich, the Sheffield Wednesdays, whose season are probably over, they'll probably get enough to stay up. I think Oxford are the other one that are, had a real sort of stop-start season, right? Started really poorly, had a real pickup when Gary Wright went in there, and are now rapidly reversing to where they were before. It looks like they're going to be losing tonight. Sheffield Wednesday away on Saturday, probably a team you'd want to play on their form at the moment, but one that Oxford have really got to get some points from. They play Leeds the week after, then they're into a crunch game against Cardiff, Sunderland after that, and Swansea, who are probably going to be safe come the end of the season. But again, Oxford really probably thought half a dozen games ago. They got enough points, but have really stalled and added very few points in that last half a dozen games. They're having the sort of run that Derby was staring at down the middle that put us into that relegation place 5, 6 games ago now. So yeah, I still think that Hull seem to have enough about them. They seem to score enough goals. Again, like Derby, they've got that goal difference in the side. Stoke have recovered a bit just lately. So I still think it's the bottom three to go down. But actually, I think Oxford would probably be the most worried of that 5 team league above us as to who might get caught by Cardiff.
Interesting, because yeah, they've had a, as you say, real mixed bag of results. I think that that victory over Sheffield United really put the cat amongst the pigeons, if I can get my words out, in that one. But yeah, I would say I probably agree with you, Chris. Any other standout games in this running for you?
Yeah, well, I think I'm looking at the Cardiff fixture sheet as we look now, and they have drawn their last 3 games, um, all to mid-table teams, and they showed a little bit of fight away at pressing getting that last-minute goal yesterday. Now they have got 3 of their next 4 at home, which could be huge because they could get, if they get 6 points out of 9, they've got Stoke, as Nigel alluded to, is a massive game. Then they've got Sheffield United away, and Sheffield United have lost the last 2 on the trot and are stalling. And then Cardiff play Oxford at home, and then West Brom at home. So, 3 home games in the last 4. We have to rely on our last game. They play Norwich away, and as Nigel just alluded to, Norwich are probably one of 2 or 3 teams that can safely start drinking their pina coladas because they're neither going up or down. They've had a very poor season under their expectations. So I go back to what I predicted in the last 10 that, as Nigel said, I think Oxford are the team that could be in trouble, and I predicted them to be down and Cardiff and Derby to be safe. I just think that if they come out of tonight with a defeat, I believe they're at home, Nigel, aren't they, to QPR as well?
Yeah, losing 2-0 as we start this in just the start of the second half. Yeah.
That could real be detrimental to their confidence going into Easter. And Easter is the time where you make or break your season because you do not want to come out of Easter with only 1 point. You need a minimum of 3 going into the last 2. Because if you come out of Easter with only 1 point, then you are looking above you to see where the favours are coming from.
Yeah, I mean that benefit for Cardiff of having those home fixtures is what has just helped Derby really in that 4 game win streak, 3 at home, of course. And I guess if I was to be a, a little bit pessimistic, that would be my concern for Derby now. 3 on the road, 2 at home in these final 5. Probably needs more than 6 points. Winning the home games alone probably won't be enough. And you look at Derby's away record over the season. That being said, Plymouth, good win in the end. And then Borough and Swansea, I'd say, were both tight games. It's only the QPR game that I'd query in terms of being a really poor away performance under Eustace. So I think when you look at the games, Derby, they should have it off on paper, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think, like you say, I think the two home games are definitely ones we should be looking to win, and they're both winnable games. Obviously keeping Luton down below us, and keeping Stoke in touch as they hopefully get to the last game. And it's a non-event, a dead rubber of that game. But I think we've got to find something at least one of those away games. If we can win one of those, I think that's absolutely done and dusted. A couple of draws is probably enough. But like I say, looking at recent performances, there's no reason why it would be a huge shock if we went to Pompey and won on Saturday. There's no reason why it would be a surprise if we went to Hull and won. Frankly, given how we played against West Brom, which at one point in time was, can you remember the last time when we won? That was West Brom at home. That performance was a good performance, and we comfortably beat West Brom. And actually, some of our best performances have been against those sides in and around the playoffs this season. The Coventrys, the West Broms. So nobody really this season has embarrassed us. I don't think in any Sheffield Wednesday. You might argue away at Sheffield Wednesday, but even then we had some chances in it. The reason our goal difference is where it is because, like I say, there have been so many games that have been decided by the odd goal. It feels like now we've got a little bit more of a threat up front, and that we're getting back towards an even keel on those. So, yeah, look, wouldn't it be great if we can get 3 points on Saturday, go home and get 3 points against Luton, sit there nicely going into those last three games with, at least one game, at least one win cushion between us and those bottom three.
One thing I'll add to that is that if we can get Kemar Roof back just for 2 games fit, and he comes up with 2 vital goals, and then his hamstring goes again, then that's just unlucky. But I think if he can become just available for 180 minutes, 2 crucial games, the last two, Hull and Stoke, what a boost that would be. It really would. And just alluding to Stoke, they've only got 1 game at home out of the next 3. And I don't think they're out of it yet because they go away to Cardiff, then they're at home to Sheffield Wednesday, then they go away to Leeds, who will be, that is just, and then they play Sheffield United at home and then us. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't count Stoke out. I just think that Stoke have got to get a win at Cardiff. And this is where it comes back down to I'd rather them draw 0-0. Because I think if both of them can nullify each other, they've both, that takes one advantage away from Cardiff. That's a home game, 2 points dropped. And then Stoke go into 2 awful games with Sheffield Wednesday and Leeds, and the third being Sheffield United. So this is where I say that if we can get as many draws as possible going in before we hit Easter, and we can, like I said, Jack, get that 3 points and go above Portsmouth. The impetus is on teams below us, not us above us.
Yeah, it's controlling your own destiny at the end of the day,
Yeah.
which Derby do just about at the moment, but it's having the firmest possible grip on the controller of that destiny, really. I think in terms of, you talk about that West Brom game, Nigel, obviously that was, less than 48 hours after Carlos Corberán left. Derby will maybe be a bit fortunate in that timing, but I would say at the same time, speaking to West Brom fans, there's a bit of discontent with after the late defeat last night and the recent form. So if that continues, that's going to be something Derby can take advantage of as well. In terms of Sheffield Wednesday, who are a couple of teams around, Derby still have left to play. They've got Oxford at home, Portsmouth at home, Stoke away, all in their final 5, as we've alluded to. They're really interesting now because I believe the wages were paid just about on time to avoid the 3-window embargo. But the feeling is, from what I can see, that people still expect Danny Röhl to go. Do the players rally round him? Do they all play for him to the end of the season? Is this about the strongest possible end to try and, either convince him to stay or get him in the shop window? They're a really interesting club right now in a bit of a predicament still, it feels like. So they feel hard to call. But yeah, certainly for Derby, it's controlling their own destiny.
I think West Brom could be, in theory, out of the playoff picture by the time we play them as well. So there's that to factor in to that as well. They're 3 points off the playoffs at the moment. Could be 4, could be 5, depending on what Coventry get out of tonight's game. And like you say, they don't lose many games, West Brom. Certainly not at home. But they do like a draw. 18 out of 41 games drawn gives you hope. That particularly if the previous game they've lost their hope of getting in the playoffs, that we can go there and build on that negative mentality, should we say, to try and get something more out of that game.
Yeah, that will be a really interesting dynamic actually on Easter Monday. Both sides coming off massive 6-pointers. Derby against the relegation rival in Luton. West Brom going to Coventry on Good Friday, where, as you say, their playoff hopes could end if if Coventry win tonight, the gap will be 5 points. Even if it remains at that, then a defeat on Good Friday would mean the gap would be 8, and they have to win all 3 games and hope that Coventry did very little at all. So it's going to be a fascinating end to the season. Big occasion this weekend as the women's season draws to a close as well. Derby County women's first team have the last home game. They've got Hull at the Don Amos Arena. That's a 2 o'clock kickoff on Sunday. But also, and this one's free entry at St George's Park on Saturday. If you're free Saturday lunchtime, midday kickoff, get yourself down to support the Derby women's under-21s who I've been covering for the last few months. They're in a cup final against Bournemouth's under-21s. So that should be a massive game. I will have packages from all of that next week, hopefully. Less coverage from Portsmouth because I'm there, hopefully working on some stuff whilst I'm at St George's Park for the first time. So that will be fun. But yeah, and also the other thing, I'll put another little call to action out. If there's any kind of post-match content or anything that we can think of, or I could do one of the Twitter spaces we did on deadline day or something like that. Get the conversation going once I'm back from that game, and we reflect on Portsmouth because there's not going to be full coverage there. But yeah, that's a little PSA, and I'll stop waffling. Any final thoughts, guys?
Look, it's in our hands. We'll take it from that. In terms of content, if anybody wants to stop me at Fratton Park and give us some comment, happy to take somebody's voice notes if they want to. So look out for me at Fratton Park on Saturday and give me a tap on the shoulder and give me your opinion.
That'd be great, Nigel. If we can do that, that's an idea that you've been banding around. I think it's a great idea just to get a perspective of a pre-game and post-game on such an important occasion. For me, Jack, it's basically, it's in our own hands, and we couldn't have said that at the turn of the year. So I'll take that. And 2 games we've just spoke about, and we're still above the dreaded line. So if that happens again in 2 games' times, and we're still above the dreaded line, it's well and truly in our hands with 1 home and 1 away. And my final point is, I just wish all the best to the girls at St George's Park, and especially obviously I have a very soft spot for Belle Peach, who's in that under-21. So Bellinio, give it some, bring that trophy home, girl.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, guys. I know this has been a slightly long recording, but yeah, massive weekend to come for Derby with the 6-pointer on the South Coast, a cup final, and a final home game of the season as well. That, as I say, will be across all of that next week for you with all sorts of reaction from that huge weekend. So thank you very much for listening, and up the Rams.